So we're recording tonight's session and we'll record the next couple of nights and we'll send these out. So if you miss a session, hopefully you'll be able to do the catch up. We've got these slides and we'll be sending out the slides as well. We're using an online tool called Slido, where if you go to that link, Luke, could you put that link into the chat? You'll be taken to an online platform where you can ask questions and you can also see what else other people have asked and upvote questions. So if there's a question that you resonate with that looks good to you, upvote it and there'll be more chance that it will get answered either tonight in the session or over the coming days. And the chat is open. Feel free to use it, but don't let it distract you. We in BCAN are not going to be, BCAN being the Change Affinity Network, we're not going to be monitoring the chat necessarily. We're not promising to do that. We've got a lot of other things going on. So the conversations in the chat may happen. If you don't want to see it and it distracts you, then next to where the chat button is, there's a little down arrow icon and you can click to disable the showing the chat previews, and then it only comes up when you go into the chat. Take notes. We'll be going through a lot, so do write down your questions or write down your thoughts that come to you. It's likely that many things will bubble up as we go through stuff tonight, things that occur to you that you want to go back to. There will be pauses and breaks, and towards the end of the night, we're hoping to get into breakouts. Here's a quote to start us off from Donella Meadows. It says, "The scarcest resource is not oil, metals, clean air, capital, labor, or technology. It is our willingness to listen to each other and learn from each other and seek the truth rather than seeking to be right." So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to introduce the Change Affinity Network. I'm going to speak through people in the order that I met them. So myself, I'm Stuart. I met myself quite early on in my life. I'm one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion. I'm in that picture with the colorful beard, and it will come back in a different color fairly soon, I promise. At the top there is Gail Bradbrook, also one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion and the co-founders of Rising Up and Compassionate Revolution. I've known Gail for about 5 years now. It was because of Rising Up and the meeting with Gail that I moved back to the UK to get involved. Below Gail in the middle is Skeena Rathore, a dear friend that I met in the transition period when Rising Up was merging into Extinction Rebellion, when XR was really coming out into the world. Skeena has been an activist and organizer for decades, I believe, and was there leading like visionary parts of XR right from the start, holding ceremony and many beautiful parts. Kofi and Esther I met more or less at the same time, who are both involved in the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, We Charge Genocide and Ecocide. Again, two people that I've known and worked with and grown to love over the last 4 or 5 years, seasoned activists that have seen many things, and really people I look to as guides in my own path of learning. Down the bottom with the microphone there is Robin Ellis Cockcroft. I remember Robin coming into early XR in the XR youth and getting the XR youth going, and so much energy and so much that Robin has done over the years, and just hearing bits and bobs of what Robin has done, profound things that Robin is stirring up, the radical restart or the rise that he'll talk to at some point as well, which he's currently involved in. And then in the bottom left is Kobana, or Jerry. I only met Kobana in the last 6 months working in the Be in the Change. What a beautiful being, what an honor it is to work with him. He's involved in the Affinity Youth Network and in the Global Majority Versus, a campaign that's taking the UK government to court. Okay, so what are these evenings about and what are they not about? Purpose of these 3 discussions is to take us all on a 3-evening journey to consider what makes a strategy, including the context of social movement theory. We're going to share what our analysis is, our shared analysis of the underlying issues, and we're going to look at what a strategic approach might be to tackle this global polycrisis of our age. And so what we're not sharing with you is a fully complete strategy. This isn't the rollout stage of a new strategy. This is an incomplete thing where we're sharing where we've got to so far. It's unpolished. It's still in some way the early stages. We as a group have been digging into this for the last 6 months together. And of course, this is the learning from many decades of movement experience and action learning. We don't know what the relationship between Be in the Change Affinity Network and XR is. XR itself is a massively complex thing. XR UK, XR International, XR ISN, XR Global, all these different facets. So we don't know what that relationship is yet, and we're not going to be answering that question tonight. That's just not the inquiry. I'm aware that I'm already a little bit over time, so I'm going to try and summarize the other things. We'll be sharing a resource list at the end of day 3. There's loads of resources of how to dig deeper into this material. Just to say for now, it's coming, what we're sharing will be coming from dozens, if not hundreds of places, research from around the world in various different things and experiences. But what we have is not the right story or the narrative or the strategy. What we need is a combination of stories. And most of us in the Be in the Change are living in the UK for all of our lives or most of our lives. And so we're going to have stuff that's English centric or Anglo-centric or Eurocentric, and we're aware of that. And we're also just doing the best that we can with our positionality, with the place that we are and who we are. And this is a tremendous moment. This is really exciting to be able to share this with so many people at this stage in order to raise the questions. And it might be that the first day or 2, we go down into a little bit of a, whoa, it's a bit much and it's all out there. And we will eventually come out of that difficult mud. It's the lotus only blooms from the mud. And so we're going to get there. So stick with us all the way to day 3. And we'll find our way through. Okay, what we're covering today, some lenses of what is strategy 4, the context of XR's strategy so far, our stories into wholeness, and then a discussion, your questions and thoughts. I think there's something else before we get to that, isn't there? Oh no, it's just that I want to check with Luke. Luke, is there anything that I've missed that needs saying at this point?
No, that's great.
Okay, then over to Skeena.
See myself.
If you start talking.
Okay. Oh, welcome everyone. I'm missing your faces. I can't see your faces, which, can I do that, love? Can
Yeah,
we
there
just,
you go.
that brilliant? Because it really helps me to see your faces, and so many of you here. Oh, I'm just feeling my connection to you, feeling what a journey we've shared these years. For some of us meant, you know, a real time and a real journey. And this moment really with you now is to feel that, is to bring us into a heart moment. You can see the quote from Rumi, and I feel we've arrived here because of the power of our hearts, the courage and the fire, the love that emanates through you all, means we have been able to get to this moment right together. And yeah, we cherish that at the BCAN team. We cherish that. We cherish our relationships with you. What I want to do now is to light. I've got a candle here, and I want to light. And if you've got it, a candle really, or something to light very nearby, you could do it with me. But I'm going to light this candle as our children's fire. Yeah, so I'm just going to get the match. I'm just going to bring it up to show you. So we light this candle for the life and the love force of the next 7 generations of children of all species. May our time together be in service to them. And that candle is going to remain lit for our whole session. And this is an invitation now to decenter your screen for a moment, so that we can be in the part of our togetherness that isn't so direct. It's in the subtle connection between us. So if you'd like to do that, just to decenter your screen, and it could just mean you're looking away to something that connects you to life. It could be out of your window. It could be to a painting that you enjoy. It could be to a plant that you can see. Just decentering your screen so that something that is beautiful to you is being seen for a moment. Something that your heart appreciates. I'm just looking at the grasses. I love grass. I can see the daisies. And their white and their pink tinge. And in this moment, you are feeling that. You're looking and feeling that. And then knowing that that is a field of connection. There's a whole field that is between us, that lives, that is part of the fire of life, that is part of our work, that lives in our relationships, where we can have deep appreciation, deep gratitude, and deep love for each other and all that lives, all that lives. Thank you. And then when you're ready, coming back to our screen and our togetherness here.
I'm not sure how I get back to the. Okay, I can't see that. Next. Right, so it's over to me to do some presenting. We've been trying to think, I've been trying to think probably all my life, actually. Certainly I remember thinking about this from being at least 9, about why things are the way they are and what to do about them. And when we're thinking about difficult problems, one of the tools we use is strategizing. And so I want to talk about strategy, what it actually is and what it comprises. And I want to talk about a few other lenses as well that are going to help us, because we're strategizing about a paradigm, about social movements, about how to work together, about the nature of this problem and how to, in some way, solve it, tackle it, let's say. It necessarily involves skimming very lightly across many different areas and academias and literatures and so on. And I am a bit of a bookaholic. And I have read quite a lot, but there's always more to know, right? So it's going to be a skim. There's a seed pod that's coming out at the end of these sessions. So if you want to do some of the readings, there will be books and articles and people's thought processes shared. It may not be for everybody, this theorizing. And if not, that's fine as well. Yeah. Next slide, please. So strategy is a process by which you start in one place where you believe there's some kind of problem, something you want to change, and you move to somewhere else. And the strategy is how you go about making that change. And it requires these elements. And first of all, an analysis of what the problem is. And we're going to be talking about that tomorrow, because, wow, this is a polycrisis time. So thoroughly defining the problem. And one of the things we can use when we're doing that is this method called the 5 whys. So if you say, well, why have we got a climate and ecological crisis? Oh, because the government aren't tackling it. Why not? Because there's vested interest. Well, why that? You keep asking why and why and why, because you need to get to the depth of what the problem is if you're going to solve it. And then utterly crucial is that you know where you're going. What's the future that you want, that you state what that is. You have a vision of where you want to be. And Skeena, my sister Skeena, will be talking to that shortly. And then how you get there are the tactics. They can involve different moments, different phases. But the things that you do, they can, in a social movement sense, they could be being on the streets together in rebellion. It can be how we organize together, how we grow local groups, how we diversify, etc. So the tactics and the spirit in which you do the tactics are the values of the organization. So important. And anybody who's worked in this kind of area knows that you might want to measure progress towards the vision that you're holding together. So some people talk about outcomes and impacts and that kind of language. So tactics are really important, but tactics and strategy are very different. Tactics can be very high signal to noise, if you like. Strategy can take place over many years and be thinking very broadly. And what people were attracted to with Extinction Rebellion was a very smart tactic. We have 3 demands and we're getting on the street, and getting on the street is going to help. It's a simple message, and that's part of what you do to attract people to the movement, is message simply. Doesn't mean it's simple, and it doesn't mean that that's nothing other than a tactic that needs to sit in a wider strategy. And I'll be coming to this more later, but I've been wondering, what are the wrestles that we have around strategy? And I think part of it is this understanding of the difference between strategy and tactics. Next slide, please. I just want to go off into something we'll cover in more detail tomorrow. It's about how people think. Fascinating work by Emma Gilchrist, much wider, and a review of 5,000 science papers. There are 2 hemispheres, 2 brain hemispheres in your head, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and they do very different jobs. The left hemisphere is the hemisphere that reduces things, is analytical, it wants to grasp at things. In fact, even if you damage your right hemisphere, some people start grasping randomly because the left hemisphere is just taken over. It turns out the culture that we live in the West favors the left hemisphere, and actually what's necessary is for the left hemisphere to be in service to the right. Now, what the right hemisphere does is it's in connection to life. There's a very beautiful TED talk of a brain scientist, what happens when a left hemisphere is closed down and she's in the right. You're taking in loads of information. You feel in life it's about process, it's about relationship. And we have both these aspects in us, and some of us may identify with more than one or the other. But when we talk about strategy, it can sound very sort of militaristic and so on, but actually it's about the vision, about what the right hemisphere in connection with life has to say to us. That's so important. So over to Skeena to talk to the next slide on vision.
Well, I will pick up actually on Ian for a moment, because what the right hemisphere does, I met Ian a few years ago, is that it provides a global picture, and the process by which it works is that as information and as perception comes in, the right takes that global view, then it sends information over, and information goes into the left to process and organize and analyze, which then gets sent back to the right to integrate and to make meaning of. And it's disturbed in our culture, and it's disturbed in our organizations, and including in XR. And so it is the place where we would have vision, we would have this immense sense for what's possible. And you'll see Steve Jobs saying, if you are working on something that you really care about, you don't have to be pushed. The vision pulls you, just as dawn pulls you awake. And I want to balance that with Audre Lorde, the great Black feminist and thinker, who said, we've been raised to fear the yes within ourselves, our deepest cravings. And so it's not about what the vision is in some sense, or the picture we paint. It's about what the vision does. It's about how it makes you feel. Because it's that 4 o'clock in the morning moment where you're in a dark abyss, where the brain has gone, here are all the problems, here are all the problems. And the left brain's broken them all down, right? For analysis and perception of threat. And something has to arch you over. It's Cilla Elworthy talks about this, you know, the right brain needs to have a word with it. The right hemisphere has to go, you know what, this is why it's okay. This is why we can trust. This is why the world is beautiful. This is why we're going to get through this, because we're moving towards this big thing. So it's a being, and it's a becoming. It's a movement. It's a motion. It's not a destination. And vision is a way of feeling and thinking about what we need. It's a gap between where we are and where we want to be, between how we feel where we are and how we want to feel. Yeah. It's not what the vision. It's not what the vision also describes as an outcome. It's a place of leading from the sense of what you need and what you want to feel and see and be in the world. And it's the practice and power of the innocence of greatest possibility. It's the childhood dream. It's an expansion. It's an expansion of being. It's a field. It's a field of possibility. It's a crucible for life and for future life. And it's the call of life from the future. It's the call of the next 7 generations, right? Of all species. And it allows for that global 360 that the right hemisphere does. It's looking at life from the widest angle, from the widest sense making, from greatest imagination. And it paints a picture. It paints a really compelling, captivating picture of what's needed and what can be seen in the moment. I remember Ian Bray, one of our co-founders, describing to me the vision of, the bird eating the seed that needs to keep a global perspective on predatory moves. So it provides context as well. It's not just it's over there and it's a dream and it's an imagination and it's all possible. It provides the context, so it sees what's here, sees what's actually alive and here. I love how Rainer Maria Rilke describes it as the energy of delight that takes you over the dark abyss, the bridge that takes you over the dark abyss. And it also vision meets our sometimes obsession with what is, and the scientific analysis of what is, with what if. In that way, it also starts to tell a story. And this is where vision becomes very powerful, because stories make the world. Stories also include our remembering who we are, and then they make and remake the world. So it brings us alive. And Charles Eisenstein said in a prologue to one of Stephen Jenkinson's books, a sign of civilizational collapse is when the sharing of stories and rituals and imagining they leave. They're not possible. They don't work. We're not practiced. They're not being practiced. It wasn't. So what I'm trying to say is it wasn't an accident that it was our first principle and vision, that we wanted to lead from that place, and that also that we were guided by some essential thinkers, as a psychologist called Jane Morton, her work to lead from vision. And I'll say more about that later. And just finish with, in Sufi practice, that's my heritage, Kashmiri Sufi heritage. They call it the steady gaze. And in the West, we might say, keep your eyes on the prize. That's what vision means and is.
So to the next slide, thank you, beautiful. Another way we can think about organizations and networks is through the lens of source, which is Peter Koenig's work and something that Tom Nixon has written about. So source fields are the laying out of the vision and the values of any given enterprise, organization, network, and so on. And they invite people to join because they're drawn, they're pulled, as Steve Jobs said, towards that vision. So somebody may arrive and say, wow, I love this. I want to start XR in Brighton, or I want to start XR for doctors, or I want to start Samba. So there's an invitation, and there's something about having a really big, broad and deep source field of a big, broad, deep vision and values that people feel attracted into, and that they can have agency within the scope of that set of vision and values. And next slide, please. And given that within that source field, then you have a network, it's good to think about network theory. Again, I'm skimming, but they're far smarter and faster than hierarchies. So some businesses organize in this way too. They call it chaotic businesses. Functional networks enable you to learn things you didn't know and to share resources and risks. They're actually good at avoiding control and surveillance to some extent, and allow organizing without asking for permission. And so one of the things that we've done in Extinction Rebellion in the last year is a piece called the Systems Realignment Project. I don't know how far and wide that traveled, but what that was looking at was how to strengthen the sort of network amongst us and some of the things that we'd need to do in order to have that go well. Next slide, please. So then if we're going to think about really difficult problems, and you don't get many more difficult than the fact that we're destroying life on Earth, right? We want to think about power because this is ultimately about the fact that there's an unequal distribution of power, and there are different theories around power. The consent theory looks at the power as a relation between rulers and subjects, governments and citizens. A network theory of power looks at individuals and how they derive their position from the different social networks that they're in. Then you've got a sort of theory of power that's about personal transformation, that individuals can have power over other people, but they can also have power with each other and within themselves if they are conscious of how that's working. And then a relational theory of power looks at power as a bundle of social relations. And so if we are going to think about a really complex problem, we want to, in fact, think about all these different aspects of power and how they're going to show up and how we can tackle them within this crisis. Next slide, please. Another book I'll recommend, but you honestly don't have to read all the books, looks at power and movements for change as part of this book. And one of the things they say is that there are different phases that make change happen. The first phase they call agitate. It's when you are sort of shouting loudly. It's when civil disobedience was especially effective to say, hey, there's a problem here and we're not going away until we know we've got your attention. The next thing that has to happen is inspiring and innovating. It's saying, well, we've told you about the problem, but hey, guess what? There are things that we could do differently. There are other ways in which we could be together, in which we could organize our economy, in which we could think about ourselves as women, whatever the thing is. And obviously what we're talking about there again is sharing the vision, right? And then another phase, and these phases can interweave, but another important phase is orchestration, because power lies in different institutions, even including some of the ones that we might feel that are on the opposing team, but may really be interested in what we're doing. So orchestrating across different organizations is important, because we will have as an ecosystem different parts of the jigsaw and different ways of coming together. So just briefly over a few more slides, please. Next slide. We can look at some of the data on how things have changed in terms of people's concern about the climate crisis. And indeed, that's been going up quite significantly to very concerned or fairly concerned. And to the next slide as well, please. So just to say on that previous slide that it's plateaued at around 80%, the public's concern about this crisis. Now, do the public think the government is responding well? Next slide, please. That's around sort of 50% the sense that the government's not handling this crisis well, and 20% don't know. I'll mention in a moment that we want 60% of the public behind us, so we're sort of in the right ballpark in principle. Now, we might want to do agitation on different issues. So, for example, we focused on the economy in the last year or so, and we heard that through a private poll, there was a 5% increase in awareness of the role of the banks in the crisis. That's about 3.5 million people, awareness raised in the UK. Similarly, we did surveys around the press, what role the press plays in this. So there are reasons to agitate on specific issues within this crisis. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of social movement theory out there, and I'm just picking a few things to point to. I've just mentioned that Erica Chenoweth saying you want 60% of public support. Now, there's been this magic number that we've quoted a lot of 3.5% support, and actually that number relates to the toppling of dictators. I would argue that neoliberalism is a form of dictatorship, but is it entirely appropriate in our context? And really we're trying to, as we'll talk about tomorrow, shift a paradigm. Certainly more people around helps. In the seed pod, you'll have a number of critiques of that number and our use of it. there's another number here that 25% is what you need to get to for social tipping points. So if a quarter of people do something different in society, it will tip society into behaving differently. Very clear that successful movements are diverse, they're broad-based, and they also win because of defections. And what that means is that the people that are seen as your opponents come over in support of you in different ways. Central then is the battle for hearts and minds. And, you know, in that way, again, back to vision, what is it that we want people to be thinking and feeling? Another aspect is to grow organisational capacity. We need to share our movement history. We need unity and a degree of discipline. One of the things that Vint Hagen shares is that it's important to avoid giving people the sense that it's the state that has the power, because that takes away the collective power that we have. And you can have moments of breakaway flanks that are heading in the direction of violence. And what Belogioso says is that strong leadership at that time within a movement is important. So to the next slide, please. There's also, going back to that 3.5%, there's also a concept of movement momentum, which is not just about how many people are involved, but how many activities take place within a given period. And the greater the concentration of events in a given period, the more likely you are to have a significant change. What's interesting, though, with this data is that the takeaway is that successful movements broaden their claims and mobilize people over an extensive set of issues. So it doesn't matter that they're all focused in the same place, actually, and it doesn't matter if they're all focused on exactly the same issue. They're just keeping the issue in the spotlight. So that's interesting data. Next slide, please.
Shall we have a pause? That's so much information.
We had this agreement that we would, yeah, just a minute.
So it's a sincere pause for us all to just breathe. And we don't need to know all of this information or take it all in. It's just a glimpse into what we've been thinking about.
Thank you, brilliant. So next slide. Now, really key point is that communities of togetherness are what social movements grow out of. And that's the work of Grace Lee Boggs. And again, this is all in the seed pod that you'll have access to. Stellan Vint Hagen brings out 4 different aspects. He's done a great synthesis of all the sorts of social movement theory. And he uses different language. For example, he uses the word utopian enactment, but we prefer to say being the change. So it's enacting the future we want to be, a crucial bit. Back, please, on the slides. I don't know what happened there.
Can we go back?
Yeah, thank you. So co-liberation, changing how we think and act together, a crucial part of social movements.
I'll just say something there around the work of trying to understand why the civil rights movement worked, was that they came to an understanding about this togetherness piece being that it was never a mass movement. They declared we were not a mass movement. What we were communities of care, convivial assemblies. They called it convivial assemblies. And our special secret was that we shared food and song and care for each other's families. That's what we mean by communities of togetherness, and that's what co-liberation is trying to bring ways and hows of how to do that together.
Thank you. And then there are moments of power breaking. That means collective sort of pushes and focuses on making a big change together, when the movements, when the communities of togetherness come together and act in a focused way. Another really important part of social movement theory, of these 4 parts, is dialogue facilitation. Absolutely essential that we overcome obstacles to shared understanding. So that's not just within the movement, but wider, has to be an ongoing
For
dialogue. Yeah.
For our learning, it creates our learning together.
So just to move on to the next slide, thank you. So again, tomorrow we're going to be talking about what the nature of this problem is that we're tackling, if any hope of strategizing about it. And it's maybe helpful to think a little bit about nature here, because, hey, guess what? We are of nature and we are in nature. Nature is based on simple rules that, when repeated at different scales, one can think of fractals, you get emergent properties that you wouldn't have expected. So atoms become molecules, become cells, tissues, organs, and so up, all the way up to biospheres. And within those emergent properties, there are different systems, like ecosystems, at play. Donello Meadows' work focused on systems. It's a sort of group of interacting, interrelated elements that create a unified whole, and she defined 12 leverage points in which one could affect a system. Not going to go into them all. One of the key places is how to shift the paradigm that one is operating in. Next slide, please. So don't worry about the content of this, folks, although you can have access to these slides if you want to look at them and the literature that's underneath them. But you can look at all the feedback loops, for example, within the for-profit economy, and how it carries on reinforcing itself and leading to environmental damage. However, also, next slide, please. You can look at feedback loops that are positively reinforcing as well in a not-for-profit economy with minimalist lifestyle interventions, and how to create good and healthy feedback loops in there. I just wanted to say that in terms of, we're not making this up about the feedback loops in the system. There is a whole literature out there about it. So over to the final slide for this part, which is about shifting paradigm.
Thank you. So back to Donello Meadows for a moment, because she said the most effective point in her humble opinion to intervene in a system is the mindset or paradigm out of which the system, its goals, power structure, rules, its cultures arises, right? So the intervention point that we have been grappling with these months is the paradigm. It's enormous. The paradigm being the dominant culture, the dominant worldview, yeah, the dominant mindset. That's what we're grappling with, confronting, wanting to make an intervention in. Have we got the slide? And oh yes, sorry, before I move on, you know, in the beautiful sense, just you'll see what Arundhati Roy says about the new world. It's the new world. That's the paradigm, right? Shift. Have we got the slide, the Thomas Kuhn slide coming next? Did we make that? No. Okay.
I'm so sorry. That was my job. I didn't manage to.
No worries.
Okay. Sorry, Skeena.
Okay. So we were going to have a slide for you. It was a picture of the model of, and you can maybe, this is something to do before tomorrow, if you have time in your busy lives, is to look at the structure of scientific revolution. It describes how paradigms collapse, how worldviews collapse. It's you know, and how a paradigm shifts. It's reductionist, right? And we've got to remember that it's based in the worldview that we have, right, in narrow Western imperial agenda. But it's still really helpful, and I'll just say some things about it, even though the slide's not here. what happens is the worldview falls into crisis, right? The polycrisis could be doing that for us now, right? That there's a sense of crisis in so many lives, in most people's lives, right? That they're going, hold on, none of this makes sense. And what you begin to have are pre-paradigmatic schools of thought. People begin to talk about why it's not working. You start having academic papers written, and conferences start to organize about what is the polycrisis, what's going on. Wide-ranging discontent starts to take place, and the paradigm tries to adjust. It tries to stretch itself, and it makes modifications. It tries to reform and incrementalize something that meets this unrest, the civil unrest. So it's like it tries to, when we've outgrown a house, what it will do is try to add more rooms to a house. So for example, you could say that when we've had terms like, oh, thank you, thanks, love. So here we are, model drift. I'm talking to model drift and model crisis. And you could say, so for example, when we talk about benevolent capitalism or compassionate or regenerative capitalism, that's us trying to add another room to a house, right, of market fundamentalism. Or the fourth industrial revolution, the Green New Deal, that's a classic one for this paradigm, to be adding a new room to the house. And then, you enter this revealing stage in the model crisis, and between model crisis and model revolution, lots gets revealed. Truth power, right? Truth power starts to widen, and that was our first demand. And hey, great, we saw something there, we really did. And then there's a relinquishment stage. People start to let go. It's a very painful stage, but it creates that moment of possible revolution. People start to dismiss the old paradigm. The old paradigm fights back and denies, and it will get, and censorship begins. We're seeing that now, right? We're seeing that now. Mass censorship. It will become more authoritarian, more more controlling of its trying to hang on to the old paradigm. And then some deep learning, something happens or can happen where the paradigms meet for a peaceful transition, because no one's winning, and an integration process occurs, right? There's a learning process, deep learning process occurs, and then we're into paradigm change. And we'll come back to it tomorrow, but I don't think we've had a paradigm change for possibly 8,000 years. We've not had a real revolution, maybe, for thousands of years. So it's not that we're not just calling for a scientific revolution here, but a cultural, political, economic, and systems revolution, a true revolution. I also want to add and thank Cassandra Veaton here, because she's done at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. We met her again some years ago, and I spoke to her in setting up the Vision Circle. And she's organized much thinking about what is a paradigm shift. She teaches a course, or did do until recently, called Consciousness, Communication and Change. And it's from her research on paradigm shifts. She said to me, I just want to share these words with you, that, Martin Luther King, and we've heard these words before, I'm sure. Martin Luther King said he had a dream. He didn't say he had a nightmare. I think we are in a kind of near-death moment. We're in the paradigm dying moment. And it's a near-death moment where you go to the light and you have to decide, are you going to go back? Or are you going to and start anew? Are you going to die? Or are you going to start anew? And if you do, you're going to have to live very differently, and everything will change. Yeah. And she, again, will talk more about, she gave us something, an equation of 3 parts as to what to work on when we're trying to describe this paradigm shift. And we'll come back to that tomorrow. Thank you.
Next slide for Stu. next one after that.
Yeah, so folks, we've reached the end of part one. Hopefully you've got a sense of this is complex. We're not trying to get a government to change a policy. We're trying to change a system, a global system with the billions of people on this planet who are in patterns and cycles that have been there for not only hundreds of years, but thousands of years. And a lot of people have put a lot of time into thinking, how do we do this? And this is our articulation where we've got to so far. But there's more to come. We're going to take a break now. So in this break, take the chance to move, stretch, whatever it is, look away from the screen. Have some watering time, whether that's water going in or water coming out, whatever the water is needed for you in this time. And then noting, take a few minutes. We're just going to turn the cameras off and stuff. We can, take a couple of minutes to write down your thoughts in your journal, or to draw a little sketch or a picture of what's alive for you right now. Or remember that we've got the Q&A tool, and so feel free to put stuff in there. Luke, I hand over to you.
Yeah, great. So if we come back at 7 past, so that gives us a good few minutes to have a little leg stretch. Yeah, just wanted to say, I don't think we mentioned at the end, we will have some free space for you guys to all self-organize into breakouts if you want to at the end of the event. So if you want to digest and process together, there'll be no time limit, there'll be no facilitation on that. But you'll just be free to meet each other and choose stuff over together. Just one other little technical point just before everyone runs away is just, it's really, I'm super keen to get feedback from people at the end of the workshop, because we've obviously got the next 2 days, and I want to get your feelings on how things have been going when we finish. So just keep that Slido window open. I'm just going to put the link one more time in the chat. So that's the Q&A, but it's also it's going to later be the feedback form. So we'll get your ideas on how to do even better tomorrow and the day after. Okay, so see you at 7 past. So that gives us just over 10 minutes. Yep. Cool. Anything else to add, anyone? Lovely. Great. Thanks so much.
of change. Thank you. There's this article by Berglund and Schmidt, and Brian Sperling's agreed from our feedback and learning team that we can share some digests of that, and Chenoweth's work as well, which close that. Paolo has been bringing through information on different social movement theories, like the work of Vint Hagen, and correcting the sort of misunderstanding around Bill Moyer's work, blah, 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 right? I don't know how much of that you want to know, but there's been this sort of concern about our, what this is, our tactics, our theory of change, our strategy. So next slide, please. And I realized I used to feel a bit confused, and you had this, on the one hand, you had people who would be more on the left saying, well, you haven't got an anti-capitalist critique, and then people on the right saying, they're hideous anti-capitalists, can't you see? And actually what we used to do when people joined XR at the start, and I'm guessing this stopped, but we used to give them Rising Up's overview strategy, which is again going to be in the seed pod. And that came out of Compassionate Revolution, which was about bringing together a space for collective actions of art, heart, and civil disobedience. So the art being making things together, or brandalism, heart maybe being moments of mass meditation or relational works, and then acts of civil disobedience. And it's when you look at what XR sort of seems to think now, is that we get confused and thinks the strategy when we say we've got 3 demands and we get on the streets and there's going to be this moment when the government concedes. It's like, well, really, is that what our analysis of this issue is? Because it's not what's in the sort of Rising Up papers. And how is that taking us towards a vision of the future when we merely mention a citizens' assembly? What the original strategies were about was that you really need this sort of diversity and this focus of coming together. And as we said in social movement theory, diversity is strength. And I mean, all the different types of focuses that have naturally arisen, for example, trust the people. And by the way, there is in the seed pod an invitation to trust the people's latest trainings. So the power breaking was the moments of coming together, and you need orchestration for that. But the strengthening of the global network is crucial, and that's what our colleagues in XRISN have been doing. But you can feel perhaps this sort of confusion if you're not clear on the fact that, the XR, it's a tactic, folks. It was a tactic of rising up, is a different way of saying it. So, and you can tell it's a tactic because it's simple, and everybody said, that's great, we love it, it's really simple, we're going to get out in the streets, we've got 3 demands, and happy days. And we saw progress from that tactic, right? It's not a strategy. So let's move on to the next slide.
Yeah, I want to bring us back to the vision for a moment. And when I found this quote, Steve, from this Goliath of the Silicon Valley, I had to smile and feel something, feel something about my discomfort, which is that, I had to put up a white man's quote and how hard and where I've been in XR in relation to that bringing the visioning, bringing what that means, bringing its value, its meaning. So I want to talk as to a little bit about that, because it's part of it feels like it's been part of the paradigm and a part of what we're dealing with, but it hasn't been able to be bought. And I want to remember Jane Morton, who very early on said to us in the when we were creating Extinction Rebellion, and its tactics and its messaging, its communications, and we're thinking about a communication strategy. And she said, well, what you need to do is you describe the problem with emotionality. You describe, then number 2, you describe your values and the problem in the light of those values, right? You make meaning of that. And then you need to describe your vision. You really need to describe your vision and tell people what that is. And in XR, there's been this and there's a tension. There's always been a tension, because when we said we were beyond fucked, which mobilized, it was a slogan that mobilized people, right? And when we said, well, we're not into hopium, I am instincting that we made vision wrong, right? And it's what this paradigm does too. It's what the domination of the left brain and the mechanization and the compartmentalizing and the splitting up does. It doesn't allow vision to come forward, right? It also, it's very, very hard if you're giving a message, if we're giving, which we have done, a message of desolation and despair, where we're invoking a collective sympathetic nervous system response of fear, right? Then it's very, very hard to then bring vision alongside that. But it makes it even more important, because when you are triggering the adrenal glands, we're all being triggered in that way because we're in an existential crisis. It's life, death. Then the love and the beauty and the vision and the joy really matters, right? But it is an atrophying capacity in the West. It really is. Under this mechanization and the short-term thinking, the disconnection and the disassociation of the physiological states that we're in, the climate anxiety that we're in, these states of fear and depression, it's really, really hard to bring vision through. Yeah. And so there are other echoes around this, which we'll talk about more later, but part of the difficulty of bringing vision through is that we're in a paradigm of power over, and power over doesn't like vision. It doesn't do vision very well. Conquest activism doesn't do vision very well. It fits this paradigm, the way this paradigm does activism, for it to be quite bereft of vision, right? Quite visionless. And that's true of us as a big political, if you look at culture, you know, culturally, there's a degradation of political vision, right? There's increasingly less democracy, which is part of that, and more fascism, hopelessness and helplessness and powerlessness within that. And it's a bit of a vicious circle, because the more hopeless and the more helpless and the more powerless we are, the less we have vision. The less we have vision, the more hopeless and helpless and powerless we become, right? And in XR, there's been this pattern, right? And we've had visionary constructive times. We really have, especially in the beginning with our garden bridges, our pink boat, right? We had visionary actions. They were constructive actions where you're leading, the action represents your vision of the way you want the world to become and come into being. And just to say one last thing, that in Compassionate Revolution and in Rising Up, there was such a strong vision. There was such a strong vision, and it was being led from that place of vision, and something's happened to that place. Thank you.
Maybe to add as well that there are cultures that are informed and led by their cosmovisions. Yeah. So there are cultures in existence today and amongst us, which is why it's so important to centre the voices of folks that are not just stuck in this paradigm, yeah, as many of us are. So next slide, thank you. So back to this sort of more esoteric concept of source fields. When XR started, the source field of attraction included very strongly the principles and values, which then need to become part of the strategy, except we didn't have the how on many of those principles and values, didn't know how to bring about a regenerative cultures. We didn't know how to do feedback and learning well. So there were many of those principles and values that we had as an aspiration, and nevertheless they were an attraction force. Many people say that's why they came or stayed, or one of the things that attracted them. What we did have very strongly was a theory of how to mobilize and how to use actions in civil disobedience. And you had a very strong, what's called a specific source in Roger Hallam in organizing in that way. However, in retrospect, and with absolutely no disrespect towards Roger here, Roger's source energy does not sit entirely within the source field that was created for Extinction Rebellion, for Compassionate Revolution and Rising Up, from which it came. And when you have a distortion in that source field, it creates a tension that's felt in the movement. And it shows up in this sort of left hemisphere. We've got to get things done. We've got to carry on. We've got to carry on with the tension with regenerative cultures. So if we move to the next slide, please. And what that's done is led to, I mean, just to say, I've been so in this journey with Extinction Rebellion. It's not like I realized this was all happening at the time. I've learned a lot, and all of us have brought our lessons and our theories to this. What it's led me to understand is that these conflicting theories of change and source energies, there's some myths that seem to have got embedded into Extinction Rebellion that is all about civil disobedience and resistance. Where just from social movement theory, it's a strong element, but it's not the be all and end all. Otherwise, you can't create the sort of diversity of approaches, the attraction fields. Somehow we've got this story that it must include public disruption. Well, it can, but it doesn't have to. And dialogue's going to be really important, the different ways that we bring our vision and our ideas and our inspiration to the wider public, and the ways that we show ourselves to be the change, to enact the change. And the most bizarre of all, really, and I've heard this many times, is that actions lead this movement. I don't know where that one came from, but it's strategically a mess, frankly. Vision needs to lead and direct a strategy. Otherwise, how do you know where you're going? And let's be clear, it's really dangerous not to have a vision, because if what we're saying is that, oh my goodness, there's a climate and ecological crisis and something must be done, and we want the government to do something and they've got all the power, you know, somebody said to me recently, I just want to squeeze some more stuff out of the government. The government is going to act on this crisis. It's going to do things like increase spending on the military. It's going to close down borders. It's going to grab land off people. It's going to whip up racism to justify what it does. You know, it's going to focus on business as usual, techno fixes and all the rest of it. And you can worry about the direction of travel if you don't have vision as leading towards eco-fascism. So it's utterly important that we have vision leading the direction. And it can lead to what is known as cargo cult sort of thinking, which I won't explain that, look it up, it's a sort of interesting concept, whereby people believe that by copying partial elements of something that happens somewhere else, this is a reductionist left hemisphere at work again, folks, you're going to get the same results. So we'll get X arrests and Y in jail, and this and Z will happen. It's also known as the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. So yes,
just add something there, my love.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to say that the 10 principles and values that we were grounded in, they're all visionary, that they are vision, that is the vision in some ways, right? And that in trying, especially that first year, in trying to aspire and to be feeling and thinking deeply, because it's not that we didn't, especially as I say that first year, about those principles and values. We learned some stuff. We did learn some things together. And the issue is to integrate that learning. And we didn't. And some of us tried, and we're always trying. It wasn't a wrong right. But things got lost in this emphasis, in this actions emphasis. We got lost, and we lost each other in it as well. So just to say that.
Thank you. So to the next slide, thank you. So in thinking about these sessions, I started asking people what they thought was Roger Hallam's strategy for change. He's a big leader in movements at the moment, and actually only one person answered correctly, which was interesting. It said to me that people are confused between strategy and tactics, and so I want to offer a critique of what I understand to be Roger's strategy. And first of all, to say that we'll put a document in the seed pod if we misrepresent Roger in any way here, so he can have a right of reply. And also that this is absolutely not meant as any disrespect either to his work or the people that are working with him. I mean, I think there's some incredible heroes amongst the folks in Just Stop Oil and Insulate Britain, and everybody must work to the strategy and theories that they feel is appropriate. You know, this is the point here is that there has been this, because of this lack of clarity around the actions and vision and the wider points, the principles and values, there becomes an overlap with Extinction Rebellion. And it's important for us to say this is how we are different. And there is an ecosystem. And actually, I do believe there is a way to work together. So, it's useful to spot maybe that you know, Roger's done many things whilst he's been in and around Extinction Rebellion, and previously when he was with Rising Up, by the way. So Just Stop Oil, Insulate Britain, Burning Pink, the Heathrow pause. There was elections, mayoral elections. There were European elections as well, Burning Pink being a political party. So my understanding of Roger's strategy is it's very focused on Western so-called democracies, and it's a vanguard electoral strategy. The idea is to create a very big agitation that gets attention, that goes into what he would say a sort of non-linear moment where people, he's working certain tactics I'll speak to, lots of people pile in at the time, and then if you've got enough power, you move into trying to be either elected or even some kind of revolutionary moment. The vanguard bit is that, of course, first of all, people think you're ridiculous and who the hell's these daft people in Burning Pink or whatever. And then at some point, as the shit hits the fan, they're like, okay, maybe, you know, these people actually were speaking the truth to us all along. So that's my understanding of what Roger's strategy overall is about. And all of the other things are tactics. They're just trying things. And of course, when anybody's sourcing something, they bring their own unique strengths and weaknesses to that. And in some way, some of the critique here will perhaps feel personal because it is somehow critiquing what Roger brings through in all the brilliance and focus that he also brings. And that I'm not here to particularly critique as a person. So from a perspective of strategy, again, the analysis is very much that it's an emergency, whereas I would say there's a degeneration that's been going off for 5,000 years, speeded up in the last 500 and even more so in the last 20, and very much recommend Paul Hawken's book on regeneration, how to solve the climate crisis in one generation. So there's a big focus on states, that states are the ones that got the clout, like in a wartime, to make massive changes that would therefore require states to want to make the change, and that we're going to have to tackle democracy at some point. I would agree on that. I'm not sure that the electoral route is going to work for us. Part of the critique would be that the meta role of global finance and the global economic system is not taken into consideration, something we'll be talking about more tomorrow. And the appealing to the state, as Stellan Windhagen critiques, can reinforce the power of the state. Why do we just want to keep going back and asking the government for the change when the change can come from the people? And power, this is a self-optimizing system, folks, been around for a long time. The domination paradigm, again, more on that tomorrow, but it resists change. So, you know, if your strategy is focused on the sort of arrest jail thing, they're going to work a way around that. For example, the use of electronic tagging. And crucially, what I've not seen in this focus, as far as my understanding on Western democracies, I think Roger works with folks in Australia and Germany and North America and elsewhere. We're not seeing the idea that there may be, and that there is power, absolute power in the majority world in the global South. And how are we going to work together with our family in the global majority? There's also a centrality to carbon that comes through, which Charles Eisenstein's well critiqued in Climate: A New Story, that really water is the central issue here. We have a degradation of so much of not just our environment, our internal environment. This goes way beyond the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. So I don't see an articulation of vision, and I see it not being valued. And again, it's in XR we're different because it's our first principle, although without really feeling the vision and expressing the vision, this risk, very significant risk of eco-fascism. And then the values that I understand, and I've enjoyed working alongside Roger when you're in his team and wanting to do the same thing. But what I've spotted is that if it creates progress, it's worth doing. That there's something around the ends justifying the means, whereas XR has said, at least it aspires to regenerative cultures. And the key critique here is to say that the master's tools are not going to dismantle the master's house. Another book I would highly recommend is Anthea Lawson's book on the entangled activist, about what it looks like when activists are trying to operate with the master's tools. The tactics that Roger uses out in the world, many, and he's written about them in the Radical think tank, and again we'll put the links in the document around the use of escalation tactics. He appears to be innovating at the minute, trying to organize and mobilize at the same time, using attritional focuses. There's a lot in terms of his use of drama in the communications strategy. I don't mean to make it sound like Roger works alone, by the way. There's a lot of good minds around him. There are moments of drama. There's an appeal to the right wing, which some of us worry about, and how it can sort of reinforce current and underlying issues. So there are other tactical points like investment principle Roger's talked about. You get a lot of bang for your buck. You can see that with the actions at the Premier League. One relatively small action, lots of coverage. He talked about the Olympic principle, which was looking at real detail of the design of what you're doing and sequencing principles, what to do when, and using momentum-driven organizing. So there's so much there to learn from. It's seeing some incredible tactics. Now, what I would say, and XR has done some learning from that for sure. Going back to one of the lenses I talked about, what we're doing is focusing on the action ends of things again. It's exciting. It's stuck in the agitate mode. Where's the inspire, innovate? Where's the orchestration? And what it's at risk of is being exhausting and therefore unlikely to be effective. It's lost the value of this wide invitational field. Another thing of tactics is how you work with people, and it can be very difficult working within XR, don't get me wrong. So there's much that we've wanted to bring through around collaborative practices. What my understanding of Roger's theory of working with people is drop them in at the deep end, which can feel very empowering. You're just suddenly in charge of something, because he sort of moves on to the next thing. There can be a real drop-in of people. So unless there's a team around, and I think it's important to say this publicly, people can really put themselves on the line for a project, and then they're sort of dropped, and it's sort of moved on from. This is a bit of that ends justifying the means, and also maybe something in the neurodivergence. But burnout and conflict are likely to catch up. So I'm saying that to say this is why Extinction Rebellion Inc.'s wider mothership of Compassionate Revolution Rising Up are meant to be something different. And actually what this does is really speak to the movement theories that are out there, which is that, you know, this is a sort of a really highly honed power breaking move, but you need the other three bits if you're going to be anything like have a chance. And at the same time, by the way, that we're talking about paradigm shifts, so even more is going to be needed in those three parts. So just on to final slide. Did you want to add something?
I did.
Yeah.
So the part of this piece, and you know, I thank Roger so much. We thank him so much for all he's done, because there is a very wonderful acceleration energy that he has, right, that has created much achievement, much accomplishment as well. And it's been Gail has spoken to it a little bit around the theory of change, and that we suddenly, well, over a period of time, we decided that there was one dominant theory of change, and that actually what we were trying to bring through the 10 principles and values was an ecology of theories of change. And when we designed the DNA of the movement, that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to be led by our principles and values, and with a DNA that was this exciting, that created a much wider field of attraction, because it housed an ecology of theories of change. And in focusing on this 3.5% theory, and in focusing on being actions led, what we were doing and what we've been doing is feeding the dominant culture, right? Which will, and Gail's spoken to it already, will only respond as it knows to respond, with more domination, with more control. So it's again, it's back to, what are we doing? What is the strategy doing around the culture we live in? Because if it's upholding the culture we live in, then we're just going to keep reproducing the same phenomena and recreating the same problems. And that's part of the critique and part of the concern.
So final slide of this section. Beautiful book that came out this last 12 months. One of the things that we're learning about our prehistory is that people made choices about how to be together and how to be governed, and they made choices quite seasonally, actually. So there was a lot of dialogue, there was much of family coming together in community and talking, and they might have a nominal chief, but frankly they'd only do what that person said if they felt like it. It was a very much sort of collective decision-making process. And then the parts of the year when the hunting season was in, people would decide to agree to a hierarchy and be led by presumably the best hunters, who could, because you needed focus, attention, and to be organized well. And so in those seasons, people would go into hierarchy, and then they'd come back out again. And I like the way that made me think again about Vint Hagen's model, you know, that you have these power breaking moments, you come together, you push together, but in the rest of the time, there's something else going off. And another way of we can say this, going back to the analysis in the brain, the two hemispheres in Ian McGilchrist's original book is called The Master and His Emissary. And the idea is that the emissary, the left hemisphere, is there in service to the master, the right hemisphere, to the vision, so that you have this mechanization, this focus, this ability to abstract, that's working towards and in service to the bigger vision. In fact, there are indigenous stories that talk about the two brothers, and one represents one hemisphere and the other, and which brother needs to be in charge. So we have this understanding in our humanity, and there will be more on that tomorrow. The way my friend Wolfgang talked about all this sort of complexity and mess that's happened within XR, is that it's like you guys sort of stitched together some theories of change, and the stitches started to come loose. And what we're saying in Being the Change is that we know, at least in part, how we want to stitch ourselves back into the fabric of life. And that's what we're going to be offering over these next couple of sessions. So there's been a lot of talking, and we're going to move on to a different phase.
Yeah. Thank you. Oh, so stitching ourselves back together as a family. Is this a break? Stu, is this a break, love? Probably need a pause.
We're a few minutes behind, so if we could just do a more of a pause than a break.
Yeah,
obviously,
okay.
if people need to water, go ahead.
Sure.
But
sure.
we'll just
Well, if you need, if you need your pause for the loo or the do, but otherwise, let's just have a breath. Okay, we'll go on because we're a bit behind. So we talked about vision being, yes, thank you, this slide, yeah. So here we are around our children's fire, and we talked about vision as story, you know, partly as story, and then as context, as a not just story of the future and the past, also as context and where we are now together. We'll all have our stories, right? It's stories are a remembering, and they're a making and a remaking, as I said earlier. We as humanity it's an old way of being together, right? We've grown on oral traditions. It's an indigenous way for all of us to make meaning and to make knowing together. And, you know, our story and what we've told you so far, it's just our story, you know, and there are other stories out there, and people involved, you know, who are very involved and are leading from actions and different places in the movement have this. We all have our stories of how we've experienced this movement. And we said at the beginning, we had the Donella Meadows quote about listening, deep listening. And there's something to do here in the repair, in the stitching ourselves together as a human family back to the family of life, the circle of life, in that we're needing to listen to our stories. We're needing to really listen and be present and be available and curious and to our stories and to what we've lived together and who we've been together. So what I want to do now is or ask, as a matriculture practice, this is a practice in matricultures in some parts of the world. It's actually a practice from my roots in Kashmir. Is I wonder if I could just start with a minute from someone here who could share their story about how their child is. So if there's a mother here of a child under 5, under 3, we'd love to hear, and this is a symbol of how's the community doing. So in Kashmir, we ask when we gather for the youngest child, the story of the youngest child, how are they? Because we see it as a symbol of how is the community? They represent how is the community. So Luke and Stu, will you help me, love, in can someone just raise their hand if they're just 2 minutes? Okay, XR Unify has Thank you. Thank you. I can't see who that is.
I'm trying to put my video on.
Oh,
I think
Hester,
it's on
thank
now.
you. Thank you so much, love.
My youngest child is 2. I just got home from work and I said, I bought you strawberries. There's some, yeah, do you know that British strawberries are in the supermarkets again? And he says, you got me grapes? And I said, no, I brought strawberries. He said, thank you, you brought me grapes. And I said, no, I brought strawberries. He said, oh, you brought strawberries. Thank you for my strawberries. So that's how my 2-year-old is. He's happy, he's got strawberries.
Thank you, Hester. I'm really feeling the gratitude. What's the name, love? Remind me. Oh, you lost you. We've lost you.
I'm mute. He's Marlo. He's called Marlo.
Thank you, Marlo. I'm really appreciating the gratitude of Marlo. He was determined to have gratitude. Thank you. So that's how we're doing. We've got gratitude present. That's pretty wonderful as a community to have gratitude present. Thank you. And what I want to do now is hand over to our Robin and Kabina as our young ones, to tell us their story. What happened? How's it been? And where are you now? So Robin and Kabina.
Wow, thank you, Skina. Thank you, Gail, thank you, Stu, thank you, Luke, and the others of the BCAN team. And thank you, everybody, for being here. This is the biggest Zoom call I've ever spoken to, so that's exciting. I'm Robin, I'm 27 now. I was 24 when I was part of founding Extinction Rebellion Youth, and it's been a bit of a hell of a 3 years since then. So I've been invited to talk a little bit about the journey that we've been on. And I think before I start, I've only got 5 minutes, and then I'm handing over to my dear brother Kabina. And I just wanted to say that it's a bit negative, some of what I'm going to bring. We're talking here about some of the hard pieces of what young people who were invited into XR had to put up with. And I also want to reference the love and the light and the guidance of everybody who was there with us in that process. And I also want to put some gratitude out to all those young people who aren't here today, who have been on this journey with us. Lots of them burnt out, lots of them are still trying, lots of them are in different places. I just wanted to name them. And I think, so let's start at the very beginning and I'll go really quick. It was just me and a few other people who founded Extinction Rebellion Youth kind of 5 years ago. And I think one of the things to know is that we founded it just before the April Rebellion, and we went straight into the April Rebellion, and then everything went like whoosh, and it was huge. I'm speaking too fast. Okay, I'll slow down a little bit if I can. And I think the thing there that people need to realize is that we were invited into this by people like Gail, by people like Roger and others, and we created some really raw moments. I'm sure lots of you felt the same things. That was a time when the emotion was just being pulled along by the momentum that Extinction Rebellion had. And for all of you, I'm sure that was big. But when you're like 17, yeah, when you got 60 years ahead of you, and you're hearing these kind of things and you're waking up to it for the first time, you know, that's some rough stuff. And that was this moment that we were in. We were the children of XR, as it were. And one of the very things we learned very early on was that XR didn't really, in lots of ways, didn't really want to listen to us. Because one of the things that we brought very early on was that we wanted to talk more about the disease at the heart of our society rather than the symptoms, which we're always forced to talk about. We wanted to talk about oppression and violence and separation and all of these things. And we very quickly started getting vetoed by XR UK. And so I want to very much put a lot of gratitude into the idea that we turned to the Extinction Rebellion International Solidarity Network. Huge love for elders on the call, Esther and Kofi, for the love and the guidance that they gave us, because one of the things that they did was they actually understood, and this is the main thing that I'm here to say, basically, is that almost everybody knows you can't create paradigm shift if the young generation don't lead it. That doesn't mean that they're not grounded in their communities, they're grounded in their elders, but you ain't getting fucking anywhere if you haven't got loads of radical young people pushing the boat out. And XR UK just never understood that in the way that, for example, the Solidarity Network did. And so we says them, and instead what XR gave us was basically like, oh yeah, can you guys come and stand at the front of our protest and hold this sign? Or do you want to talk to the press, but don't talk about this and don't talk about that? And it really hurt. Like, it was just like pretty painful. Like, I was surrounded by all these young people just like breaking apart. And it gone like whoosh, yeah? So I had like 16-year-olds who dropped out of school, they'd run away from home, they couldn't deal with their parents. And like, you imagine this scene where, you know, we're in the offices in Hackney Wick in London, yeah? And you've got upstairs, you've got the XR UK national office, and downstairs where the meeting rooms are, every week for 7 months, you have XR Youth London, yeah? A group of 30 or so young people meeting every single week. And lots of them then go and work in the office. And the one adult in that entire time came to sit with them. And that was our Kofi, yeah? No one else came to sit with us, yeah? And we had we had our hardships, yeah? We had places where we wanted to establish our autonomy, and so we pulled away, but no one followed us. And so, and again, like I will always say, there is that strategic suicide to say, we know that young people are fundamental to change, and then refuse to engage with them in any meaningful way. So as anyone who's watched the Rebellion documentary that came out recently will know, we occupied the summer strategy meeting back in 2019. And when we came and we said that we are the children that you are speaking for, and yet we are saying that you are failing us. I'll put that speech, we'll put the rest of that speech in the seed pod. And we wrote that by seeking to protect and exclude us, you have become blinded to the simple truth that you are not alone in this fight. My parents were campaigning about climate change since I was 2, yeah? They had to look after me when I was 2. When I was 22, I can fucking fight, yeah? This struggle is our struggle, and yet still XR seemed intent on excluding us from that. And we had to try and assert that space. And I think this is one of the pieces here. And I think this is the place I'll leave, and I'll pass to Kabina, because if we're going to craft deeper strategy, if we're going to fight for paradigm shift, then we have to get beyond the tokenization of young people. We have to welcome young people into this struggle that is theirs. And we have to know that what that means is the breaking apart of the very idea that we can protect them in a world this broken. And we need to invite them into that dialogue. We need to invite them into that space, and we need to be led by what they want to achieve. So I'm going to hand over to my brother Kabina now, who's part of the Affinity Youth Network with myself, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the kind of present situation of organizing as a young person within XR.
Yeah, hey all. I don't have much to add, to be honest. I'll just speak very briefly on what Robin has kind of just mentioned, because I've joined XR, the space anyways, far later than most. But what I do have to say chimes in kind of directly, because there is nothing, both this call and what we're doing and what we've been experiencing for the last months is still stuck in this same thing. And one of the last things that Robin was talking about was this tokenization. And so that tokenization has continued in the sense of how it's now been extended largely to Global South youth, people from the Global South, people from other parts of the world. And it just feels like this is the trap that we're struggling to escape, purely because of a fear. And I think that stuckness, has always been a big problem around language. And this is something that people in XR and this dialogue we've struggled to sort of really build to understand, because, you know, if you're from our parts of the world, resistance already has its own language. People have, you know, what we understand as an intergenerational struggle has been crafted very delicately in so many different types of ways. And so just even in our communities, there is a real reason why XR still struggles to make any sense to our people and to our community. And so what we've kind of felt as a continued sort of extension of that is that you know, there's still this way in which we're keen to both, not allow young people to learn about power, feel powerful, and take up those stands in order to create their own language and move forward. And so, there's just this, getting young people to be stuck on the face of it. And so now we have a lot of people even coming to us, talking about their experiences, talking about, lack of consent, talking about, being paid to go and, do actions and then having no sense of what they're doing on the other side. And there's a lot of this energy kind of trapped in XR and this stuckness around, being scared that someone else might be able to lead and take on the struggle. And I'm not even speaking as someone here, I'm speaking mostly about, where we are really needing to pay attention to, which is Global South struggle, where, people are prepared to go a lot further and further than what we even see here. But there's just been this constant, very fierce denial of change, one, happening anywhere else, two, doubling down on, this saviorism, and then all the dangers that includes, which have been mentioned here in terms of, the sort of short-sightedness of strategy. So I say that only because it just feels like if we're going to move forward in any way, we need to be able to have these really stark conversations about why XR is perceived. It just it's still failing to make sense to many of us, to many of our communities. And so there needs to, this distance that has been created is also the struggle that lots of activists in XR are finding in terms of how you're going to build your numbers. And this is in loads of things, specifically around language, around justice, around everything being framed as, climate has this issue with justice. The climate is in trouble. Well, what about young people in schools? What about knife crime? What about, the reason why people can't stick in school, their natural rebellion that so many young people have, but that's not tapped into as an understanding of the resistance we have to the ongoing society. And this inability to hear from other resistance perspectives is basically slowly withering and killing XR. And I think most people really do know that. And, if people choose to go down that line, it is a part of a learning process for everyone. But there is just more to look within, to further afield to look. And I suppose really that BCAN, it just needs to move past this. I mean, part of why I don't have a lot to say really is that, on this call are the same people, we're largely a certain type of demographic, and the world is still currently rising and in resistance on a daily basis. And still somehow, and all the time that we've even been doing BCAN, and all the time that we've been trying to have these talks, we're stuck. And we're not moving past ourselves and our own egos, like change can't happen elsewhere. And so, I feel like there's not really too much more else to say.
Kobina, thanks, my love. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, Robin, for sharing your story. I want to invite now Kofi, and if Esther's here, just maybe to stand beside. She may not speak. I know Esther's very busy. Kofi, would you like to, dear one, would you like to please share your story?
Yeah, thanks very much. Ours as Extinction Rebellion Internationalist Solidarity Network isn't very different from what our young people have said. But the point is, when we decided to create in 2008, from the very beginning of XR, really. Even before XR was launched, we were already in conversation with the co-founders of XR about how we could relate as particularly African heritage community activists organizing within the Stop the Manganese with Child Genocide Ecocide campaign. And after the public launch of XR's declaration of rebellion, we met with Gail and Stu, through something facilitated by Faye and others of the Global Justice Forum, to see how we could work practically together. And it's on that basis that we offered to create a Global South-led space, within XR UK that could enable us from Global South communities of resistance to build an affinity relationship with XR here in the UK, but also bring into that relationship our Global South communities of resistance in the Global South itself. And that's how XRISN came into being. And we are particularly committed to a two-way learning, largely because we were not new to activism, right? Many of us had decades of different types of activism, not just here in the diaspora, but also from at home, and the kind of challenges we faced, and the experiences and knowledge, but also the resilience and survival that we had to build were completely different, from what many were bringing, into XR and what we encountered in XR. But the one thing that we're committed to was a two-way learning process, whereby we particularly, try to enable, those in XR to learn about our communities of resistance, our cultures of resistance, our own people's, long, road of marching on their own freedom's way, and at the same time to introduce our communities to XR. We were not going to be those who were taking XR into our community saying, come and join XR. We wanted our communities to know about what XR was trying to do, and to see how, through dialogue, through mutually respectful engagement, we could find some common ground of working together in harmony to tackle not only the climate and ecological crisis, but also all the other kinds of crises, that our communities were encountering. And we took XR seriously in terms of its principles, its values and principles, particularly that we said, welcome, everybody, as who you are and with whatever you bring, so that we can find some common grounds of working. We took seriously what international solidarity, supposed to mean, which is, various peoples and communities coming together, bringing their own struggles, to be able to find some common ground of harmonizing, their efforts in and being the change to make a world, for all of us, a world of global justice for all of us. We in the Stop the Manganese campaign particularly had this concept of, building Matubuntu and Ubuntu Dunia, and with time we can explain that, and focusing on planet repairs as the nexus of, not just environmental justice, but also of reparatory justice and cognitive justice, recognizing the harm and then being prepared to build a power and unify people's power, to be the change. Now, initially the co-founders of XR seemed to understand this and were actually, making real effort for us to learn together and grow, together as well, even though we're coming from different perspectives and we're coming from different experiences. But there was, that attempt on the part of some of the co-founders to genuinely enable us, to work together. And it is within that also we encountered those from XR Youth who were trying to create their own space. And we supported them, and because we also saw them as people from whom we could learn, and they could learn something, from us. But then after a while, we started experiencing not just opposition, but also hostility from certain, elements who not only made it very clear that we were not wanted unless we were prepared, to toe a line that from our experiences, from the knowledges we've gathered intergenerationally in our resistance, we knew represented white supremacy racist, attempts, to literally, either co-opt us for other agendas or liquidate us. And so we spent a long time battling for our very existence with all kinds of hostile elements, coming in, spreading tales, of falsehood, and character assassination behind our backs, accusing us of all sorts of things, even stealing money, right? And all these stories were being peddled behind our back in the white grapevines or in the grapevines of whiteness, without people coming, to confront us, to be having very honest conversations. But eventually, we had to challenge this. And when it got to us, and I could go on with that story, but the point is this: we understood XR to be, we said, an umbrella canopy under which, various tendencies of people wanting to make the effort to tackle the climate and ecological crisis, were operating, and that it provided a learning opportunity and a learning space, for all of us to get to know each other better through, the activists to get to know the communities from which we came, and to be able to share experiences and try to harmonize efforts to find common ground, and move towards tackling the not just the climate and ecological crisis, but also issues of global justice. The intersectionality was very much, a big part of it. And doing so in co-liberation, right? Doing so, because co-liberation at the core of international solidarity, where it is not about, trying to tackle the crisis at the expense of others, but insisting that together we could make it, and not leave anybody behind, not leave anything that is on this earth, behind, and that we passionately believed in that and tried to bring people to see, that way of doing things. Of course, key to us also, because every day, literally every second, an activist in the global south, is being killed for standing up, just for this. So security was essential, and we couldn't, open ourselves, to this tendency on the part of some who come into XR to walk in and walk out as and when it pleases them, to have access to all kinds of information, and then you don't know where they are taking it, and so on and so forth. So we had to, for the sake of our own communities and the activists, who are being mowed down and slaughtered every day, we had to also ensure that we created some level of protection, both for our activists here and more importantly, for those in the global south. So our way of operating was different. All of this was misunderstood. All of this was distorted, and all kinds of, stories were being peddled. Our voices were not, I don't want to go into this, but fortunately, we met also very beautiful people, right? People who, for example, some would tell, we don't understand what you're on about. We were trying to learn, we're trying to make sense of what you're bringing, but we want to learn from you, we want to work together, and many stood with us. The only reason we still exist as XRI said within XR, is that there are people who stood and put their very presence, and even profiles within and outside of XR, at stake for us, right? And we appreciate, and that is why we never went away, because we kept that hope that some time to come, by working together and learning critically from our experiences within and outside of XR, there will come that time when a critical mass will gather around this perspective. And that is where we are. This is what Beacon represents for us, being the change, making ourselves, learning from what we have gone through within and outside of XR to bring ourselves to the point where there is that clarity that, nobody, particularly from the establishment, is going to save us. Nobody is going to make that change for us. It is our own people, all the family of humanity, everything on this planet, that, values life, and there are non-human beings that also value life. It is that unity of humans and non-humans valuing life that will stand together, not just to defend life, but to be the change that gives us, a better place on this planet. That is our Mother Earth. And that is really why we are where we are today in terms of, XR Beacon.
Thank you, Kofi. Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we've heard some stories, and we wanted to have a moment for you all now to be with your stories. We haven't got much time. So this is the place, right, where we're around the fire with each other, and not all of us are going to be able to tell our stories, right? There's going to be a couple of stories that might get heard, and because of time, maybe just one or two. And trusting that those are the stories we need to hear today, with the invitation that after this session, you contact each other to tell and share your stories. Maybe you feel like you're already doing that, and that's fantastic, but we want to make space. We genuinely want to make space for us to be in our communities telling our stories, 3D, real life, if possible. I'll come back to that after we go off into our breakout rooms. But Stu and dear Luke, will you guide us into our breakout rooms now, and with the purpose of listening to maybe one, maybe two stories of your time and in XR and what you've experienced and
thank you,
where you
Skeena.
are.
Yeah, so Skeena, what's your sense? We've managed to remove the 50 room breakout limit, so we can actually choose any group size. If we have like 10 minutes, what do you feel like is a good group size? Do you think 3 people?
Three or four would be
4.
wonderful.
Okay, cool.
Luke.
So
amazing.
We're going to have 3
Thank you.
or 4. I just need about 10 seconds. Okay, so all of you will be automatically assigned into a group of 3 or 4 people now, and then I'll bring you back in about 10 minutes. Do you want to just recap the invitation, the discussion topic one more time?
Thank you, Luke. Just so the invitation is to speak from your heart and, the soul of what you've brought to XR. What have you experienced? How's it been for you, and where are you now?
Great. Okay, here we go.
What was the agreement?
Stu and Luke, do you remember the agreement as well that the BCAN team would go in and listen into some of these rooms, because we would really like to listen?
Great. Okie dokie. So recreate. Stu, could you do this? It's not, I'm not seeing how to do it. Are you happy to do it, Stu? So 3 or 4 to a room.
Yeah.
Sorry for not seeming to be able to make it work here.
Here we go.
I think it's about 70 rooms, I think. Sorry, everybody. We'll give you another minute for our tech struggles. I opened the rooms, but I couldn't seem to automatically move everyone. Working for you?
No.
It comes up, doesn't it? And it puts people in, it sort of theoretically puts them in the rooms, but they don't actually seem to go in, do they? Should we see if that's not working as it normally should? Should we try a different method, like people self-selecting into a room?
Sure, go ahead and try that.
Okay, I'll try self-selecting. Sorry, guys. So
Luke spent a good hour talking with Zoom support this afternoon, trying to get us to have more than 50 breakouts enabled, and they've probably changed some setting on the back end that's messed up.
Yeah, it's just getting. I can see it's like set it all up, but
Stu, while Luke's wrestling with that, maybe you could talk to the questions, answers, comments piece and how we wanted to handle that because of the limited time tonight. And if we don't get to go in breakout rooms, maybe we could read out some of the comments. But yeah.
Yeah, so folk, hopefully you've seen the link that Luke and I have been constantly sending out. I'll send this is the actual link, not the shortened version, where you can put in questions or upvote on things, on the questions that are already there. Maybe if the breakouts aren't working, just then invite the change folk to have a look and see if there's any that stand out, and we'll just answer a few questions. I'm really sorry that we can't get the breakouts to be working tonight.
I mean, also there's some comments there, Stu. I think like it allows other people's voices. If there's some comments that have been upvoted,
mini stories, the comments.
Yeah.
it'd be good for the recording, Stu. I wonder.
It is recording, yeah.
It says breakout rooms not started, but the rooms are open. If anyone is a Zoom nerd here and is familiar with this problem, I've opened the breakout rooms thing. It says breakout rooms not started. I've clicked open all rooms. It's assigned everyone, but it's not moving you.
Luke,
should we try pausing recording and see if that fixes it?
Let's skip the breakouts. It's not happening tonight for some reason. We'll fix out the Zoom tech for tomorrow. Sorry.
So
someone's suggesting we have to turn recording off. I think let's just try that, and if that doesn't work, then yeah, we scrap it. Okie dokie. Should we do? Well, also there's Q&A, just to put that on the radar as well. So
I think that's what we're going to do. Luke, is try and maybe if you and Stu could look through the Slido, and especially if you find comments that don't necessarily require an answer. Obviously, if there's some questions, then cool, and maybe try and direct the question to a particular person so that.
I wonder, guys, let me know what you think of this, Gail. We were thinking actually, if you look at the questions and see what you feel called to respond to, if you feel like you've got something particular that you want to say to these.
We can't see them very clearly.
Do you have the link? Is that better for you to use?
Well, we can figure that out.
I'll put it in the chat again in case that's a better way to read. But I just wonder if, rather than me and Stu trying to guess, these are the top rated ones.
I'll jump in. Yeah, I'll jump in. There's a few questions near the top there that ask about, is XR, isn't this all academic language? Isn't this exclusive? And I guess the academic nature of this, or what it is this isn't designed for everyone. It's not going to be. It's not everybody's task to get everything all the time. what we've been talking about is what we've come up with, and it's our best attempt to articulate something that is a complex thing. It is about changing a global system that spans thousands of years, and so it's going to use some complex language and concepts at times, and that's just the nature of it. And then our job as a larger whole, as a collective, is going to be to translate these things into things that are just snippets that people can go, yes to that, I believe that, that's me, I'm in.
So yeah, I can see some of the questions. Why do we choose to set up BCAN instead of working with XR UK? Well, we're still working with XR UK and we're XR BCAN. So we're an affinity network within XR UK. And just on the timescale question, we'll be talking quite a bit tomorrow about the nature of the problem. It depends what you mean by what's going to happen in less than 3 years. We understand that climate tipping points are happening already, that people are already dying, and the degeneration will carry on. There will be phase transitions in the climate system that make things get way more dangerous. And I think it's important to know that the levels of danger are there already. It depends which communities you're in. So I sort of sometimes find I have a bit of a reaction to this idea. We've got 3 years left, we're out of time already, and there's always things that we can do. Even the most renowned climate impact researchers say that half the world would die, half the world would still be here. So what world do we want to create in those dying times is a critical question, especially with the threat of eco-fascism. I'm going to say one more thing about the academic language. This is because we're talking about strategy and it's a complex subject. This hasn't been a communication to try and sort of bring people into being the change. This has been an attempt to say why we're doing what we're doing for people who want to think from these different relatively complex lenses. The point is that there are people strategizing. That's why I did a critique of Roger's strategy. There are strategies out there, but what they get translated in is to simple tactics, simple communications that make it sound simple, but they have got strategic thinking behind them.
I'd seen April's comment. A spiritual revolution was not mentioned, a deliberate avoidance of calling in a spiritual revolution or an unintentional omission. Yeah, April, we're going to talk about that tomorrow, but to just say, it's been a journey with that word spiritual in XR, right from the beginning, from our very first rebellion when we organized a closing ceremony in that November 2018, and the pushback, right, using the word spiritual, and where we've been with that journey, my goodness, up and down and all around. And the journey continues, and we will talk to some of that tomorrow.
I also want to say something about the academic thing, right?
Yeah. Please.
Because, whilst I respect the fact that there could be genuine concerns about, language and concepts that people need to understand, this, trying to say something is too complex, and has also been used to shut, out concepts that are vital to other communities of resistance and are what some of us come with, and then eventually becomes one of, just use, language and concepts that some people know, and beyond those things don't bring anything to challenge, our imagination and take us, into realms of resistance of other communities that we don't even recognize, are there at all, and for us, for one of the major problems within XR, let's face it, is this attempt to see everything through the lenses of whiteness, right? And insist that those of us who are racialized as non-white shouldn't even see and call out, that whiteness of white supremacy, right? And that even if you do, then you are offending certain people, or you are trying to, blame and shame, people. So our everyday experiences of resistance then get completely, not just marginalized, but delegitimized within XR spaces. And there is a foisting upon us, a very repressive, violent, imposition upon those of us from communities of resistance, racialized as non-white, the violence of whiteness, under the guise of a so-called, rebellion, which boils down to pseudo rebellion, and in fact paves the way to eco-fascism. And let me say, there are tendencies within XR that are fascist, and are harbingers of eco-fascism. And the fact that they try to shut down, that discussion about what they represent, is one of the banes of, XR. So, if we are true to XR as a space of pluriversality for learning, then, what we have to do is when people are introducing, concepts and ideas and practices and forms of resistance that you are not familiar with, you ask questions and you explore with them in dialogue. You don't shut, that out. You don't shut it out and shut the conversation to say that you can only talk about what I am familiar with. And then you come by taking that kind of position, you assume a superiority and you delegitimize other forms and perspectives of resistance, particularly those that are from communities racialized as non-white. So we have to be very, very careful. At the end of the day, this space that is supposed to be welcoming everybody and with whatever they have should be a space where we critically explore, interrogate in order to learn more, so that we can harmoniously work together, finding common ground.
Stu and Luke, yeah, we could probably take, can you scroll up? Are we at the top, questions and answers? And I'm just aware that these are very much questions and not comments, and wondering about that, my loves, if it's all coming up in one big pot.
I think if there's one more question to be answered, and then we're going to close, it will go to Kofi and then final closing with Skeena. But is there one more thing that somebody wants to say on the question?
I think there's a theme here that I'm spotting around, and what Kofi's spoken to quite deeply, that I'm hoping that's answered. The theme around what we're bringing in terms of theory and an academic perspective. I think we need to just probably move on. Like, what time are we at, love? Yeah, it's at 5. We're at 5 past.
I mean, I think I would just say quite a few of these questions speak to what's coming tomorrow evening and the one after. So good stuff.
Okay. Cool. We just have a minute or two just to wrap up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
There is some critique in there. I do want to just say that about the order and what we decided this as a group about how to go about this communication. So thank you.
And it's good to hear that you want to hear the stories. That's really good to hear. So we're going to attempt to end our time together, as hard as it is. There's so much to say, and we're really wishing that we'd had that time to share and listen. So I wanted to say something about tomorrow and how the questions have signaled on there needing to be a tomorrow for us, which is that we will speak tomorrow very much to what we think and believe and feel the nature of the problem is. What is this paradigm doing in its very roots and its behaviors, its patterns, its hallmarks, right? How on earth have we created this polycrisis? And what is our human nature? What happened to our human nature? How did we, as human beings who have learned to collaborate and who have thrived over civilizations through collaboration, how have we got to this point through our nature, our own nature? So that is very much, and then we're going to come back to some concepts around that we're holding as dear, as central concepts within the Being the Change work and what they mean. And we're going to lift ourselves out of that the grim reality, you know, and speak to what we think can come, the beautiful world that we think is calling us, that vision that is calling us. So I have the Children's Fire candle still here. I want to remind us that we are being invited to share our stories as we go off. There's tech Gail's just written me a note saying learning and Kofi. And that's coming. Love, we've changed that order to tomorrow. Yeah. So we're going to just again sense into this children's fire that we lit, that we've got lit in our hearts. And appreciate that life calling life, the next 7 generations of all species, willing us on, cheering us on. So I'm going to blow, and if you want to blow it out with me, please feel free to. So 1, 2, can we do it together, love? 1, 2, 3. So until tomorrow, much love. See you soon.
Thank you.
Here. Thank you for being here.
Everybody, if you'd like to give us some feedback, that would be amazing to help us just know how today's landed for you and help us shape the next 2 days. So using that same Q&A link, you'll see there's now a kind of feedback page on there. We'd love to get your thoughts and feelings on there. It'll inform how we design the next couple of days. Thank you all so much. Anything from anyone else? Amazing. Rest well. Bye, everybody. Thanks, Angie.
Thank you. Goodbye. Good night.
Night. Like a little checkout going on in the chat. It's cute. Oh, Jenny, I'll put the link up again for you. Oh, the Q&A. Yeah, that's because the Q&A has been replaced by the feedback page now. You should, I think, still be able to click on Q&A at the top if you want to go back to it. Thanks, G. So you've heard the feedback.